If you have a trailer that has a torsion axle setup, can you convert it over to a standard spring axle? And should you convert it over to a standard spring axle? Stick around with this video. We're going to cover the ins and outs and see if this is a candidate for a conversion. So most trailers can be converted from torsion to spring and from spring to torsion, but what would constitute that change? Torsion gives a smoother ride. We have a video that we compare torsions to spring. We'll leave a link in the description below on that. In many cases, the spring axle will hold up better to weight, curb strike, and conditions. Yeah, this is an all-steel trailer that's going to come standard with torsions. In 99.9% of the time, that is going to work perfect. This is, if I were going to go out and buy one, this is what I would buy, especially if I'm going to be making a living with it. This trailer is going to outlast a lot just the way it's constructed. The axles on it with independent suspension are great. This trailer is a little unique. It only has 3,500 pound axles, and the owner of it loads it to the maximum, if not a little bit more. So we're going to do an axle upgrade on it. We could just go in with a 5,200 pound axle upgrade, stick with torsions, but he's already ruined these torsions a couple of times, and for his sake he wants to go with a spring suspension just to make it a little easier to find an axle if he does damage one. So that's his call. Not saying that it's better or it's worse, but it can be done, and in some situations the spring suspension may be better suited for what you need. The first thing you have to do in order to convert it over to a spring suspension, you're going to take some measurements. You need to make sure it's not going to change your ride height. You may have to go to a drop axle. This one he actually wants to raise the ride height for his purposes, so we're going to go to a straight beam axle. So it is going to give us some more tire to fender clearance, and also we're going to be upgrading the tire to a 16-inch tire instead of the 225/15, so we need a little extra clearance. Now this one is going to be taller, but what we did for that customer before we ever decided to go with this, we mocked it up, we jacked the trailer up, we simulated the ride height empty with the 16-inch wheels on it, and if it had a straight beam 6K axle, to make sure it didn't look goofy, to make sure it was going to be what he wanted. So we went through all those steps first. After seeing that, he wanted to go with the 6K, so that's what we're going to do. If you decide to do this, you're going to have to take a series of measurements. You also need to make sure there's going to be nothing that interferes with the spring suspension, because you will have to add a center hanger where this jack point is. You'll have to add a front hanger, and then you'll have to add a rear hanger for the springs to carry. These are a bolt-on torsion that has a bracket that's welded to the frame. So this one you would simply unbolt the axle, but then you're going to have to remove the bracket that's on there in order to stay out of the way for the spring. Now if you were going from a spring to a torsion, you would have to do the same thing. You may have to cut the hangers off, but actually sometimes you can actually leave the hangers in their locations and just put your bracket or weld the torsion axle straight, because it will not interfere with anything. So you need to figure that out. You need to check your ride height. If you're not qualified to weld the suspension on, then you're going to need to take it to a shop and make sure that they're qualified to do it as well. The most important thing we want to keep here is our current wheelbase, and you would measure unloaded from center to center. This is a 36-inch wheelbase. We want to stick with that. And then we also want to recenter where our tires are going to go. So we're going to measure, and we're going to mark and measure the center of the spindle on the backside, and we're going to make us a hard line on the frame, so when we come back with our suspension, we can use that as measurements to measure everything off of, to get it exactly like it was before, and to begin the removal and then retrofit of the spring axle. So there's going to be quite a bit in this. We're not going to film every little bit and piece of it. We're going to show you as we go along the removal, the measuring, the installation, and then we'll show you what it looks like with the upgraded 6K with a 16-inch tire and wheel. Now before you decide to go ahead and do that axle upgrade or conversion, or really any other modification to your trailer, especially if it's going to depend on cutting or welding or drilling, make sure that it's not going to void or to alter your manufacturer's warranty if you still have a warranty left. This trailer here is out of warranty, so you don't have to worry about that. But if that's important to you and you still have warranty, just make sure you get with either the dealer you purchased with or the manufacturer to get approval before you do those modifications or upgrades. Now that we've got the center of both spindles marked on the trailer frame itself, and we know our wheelbase is 36, we're going to begin removing these axles. These are a bolt-on torsion. Sometimes they're welded onto the frame, so if you have welded on, you would have to completely cut those off. Now that being said, the mark that we put on here of the old axle position, that's just kind of a starting point. when we get everything prepped, as we put our new hanger system on for the spring suspension, we are going to do an axle alignment from the coupler back just to make sure that it's true, and then we'll work off that alignment to put the second axle on it. Make sure your trailer's completely supported. Make sure you have it high enough in order to be able to get underneath there to work, because you're going to do some cutting, some grinding, some welding. Make sure that you have the axle supported when you go to drop it off. Torsions can be a little finicky because they're cantilevered the way the arm works. So if you just stick your jack up underneath the center of the axle and try to lower it down, it's going to fall. So I'm going to show you how I do it. I'll put the jack underneath 1 foot of the torsion and take the bolts out, then go to the other side and loosen them up, and it will kind of just slowly come down. Then I'll reposition my jack to the other side. Now, with all of that being said, this may not be a job for you. This may be beyond your skills, and that's perfectly fine. This is really just a show that in some situations, this is a definite or doable upgrade in it, but unless you're qualified to weld, do an axle alignment, put all that stuff back, you may want to have a shop do this. This is not to give you more confidence in order to do it, just to showing that sometimes this is a need, and sometimes this is a conversion that we will do, whether we're switching from torsion to spring or from spring to torsion. Now we'll move around to the other side. We're gonna leave this jack here. We're just gonna go loosen those other bolts. We're not gonna take them all the way out, and I'll show you why. And now we'll go back and lower the side that we have the bolts removed. We have both bolts here with the nuts just finger tight. So on a torsion, if both sides were loose, if you just try to drop it, it's gonna fall due to the drum being cantilevered off of the axle. So we left the other side still attached with some bolts just to give us some control coming down. Sometimes this will be really tight and you may have to persuade it loose. And one thing I forgot to mention, let alone forgot to do, is cut your wiring loose before you drop it, just to make it easier on yourself so that you don't rip any of your wiring out of the trailer. So this gives you a little better control. Now on this one, I will take another jack to the other side and lower it down because I have this so high off of the ground. If you were just taking this axle off to put a new axle underneath it, you would not need it this high off the ground. You would be a little lower, and you could simply let this jack, or you let this axle rest on the ground, utilize the same jack on the other side and just drop it down, and it's not going to flip over. Here it's going to put it too much of a bind because I am so high off the ground. So we'll grab another jack, then we'll begin to let the other side down. And just stand clear of the axle in case it does fall. Slide it out of the way, do the same thing to the other axle, and then we can start prepping the frame to receive the new suspension components. And once we remove these axles, we're going to remove any wiring, whether that's lighting related or brake related, away from all this area. So when we do cut and or weld, that we don't burn any of that and have to start over. Sometimes it would be beneficial to pull a fish wire back, like some welding wire or something that won't burn up. If it's a hard fish, this one's pretty easy to access. So we're just going to pull it out, then we'll refish it. So before you cut everything off, make sure that you can get, or you have all the parts ready to go. These are most of the parts that are going to be required for this conversion, other than the axles and the wheels and tire mount. We have several components here. The equalizer, whether you're doing double I suspension or if you're doing slipper like we're going to do, the slipper is heavier, make sure you have your equalizers. This all comes in a kit. Center hangers for your equalizer, all the rest of your hangers, and then all the miscellaneous nuts, bolts, equalizer, bolt, springs. You have different spring setups, and also make sure you know what measurement, depending on what spring setup you run and what suspension kit you're running, there are different measurements. Of course, you'll need your U-bolts, which you have a couple options on that. There's lots of little parts here. I will say this, even though this comes in a kit, be sure to open the kit, whether you do it before you leave the supply, your parts house where you're going, or when you get home, to make sure there's everything that needs to be in here. It is nothing to be short a bolt or short a hanger. You don't have to drive all the way back to town. That can be aggravating. So you need quite a few parts. I'm going to show you the most important part you're going to need. It's in this box right here. This is the top secret part. I'll tell you, I usually short myself on this one, but it's patience. You're going to need some patience. You're going to need, whether that be for you or if you have a shop, you know, don't be in a rush. Make sure you do it right, and make sure that you have all your stuff in order. Now, all we got to do is take a bunch of measurements, tack this stuff on, take a bunch of more measurements, make sure we're good to go, weld it out, then put it all together. So this is the bracket that is welded underneath this unit that holds the torsion axle. Most of the time you're going to have to either remove this bracket or do a partial removal so that the axle doesn't get in the way, the new spring axle or some of the suspension. So you have two options. You can completely remove the bracket. What I'm going to do in this case, I'm just going to cut the bracket underneath, basically this turn down, that flange, we're going to cut that off. We're going to leave this component still welded to the frame. It's not going to hurt anything. And by doing that, I take less of a risk of compromising the trailer frame. And if they ever decide they want to go back with a torsion, they can just go back to this plate, and it's only going to bump the trailer height up by about 3/16 of an inch to give them something that's clean to weld to, and we possibly don't burn a hole in the frame or, again, like I said, compromise it. So we're just going to cut the flanges off both sides. We'll clean that up, and then we will also, on most of your torsion trailers, especially on the all steel, they have this jack point underneath. We will have to remove that because we have a center hanger that's going to go here. So we do have to cut this off the frame. We have to clean it up. That's in our center hanger is going to go somewhere in this location. I'm going to use a plasma cutter to remove the flanges. You could use a torch. You can also use a cutoff wheel. My two top choices would be plasma, torch. Cutoff wheel would be my last choice. Well, the easy part's over. Now we got to prep the frame. We got to get all of our components, figure out where they go, how to measure them, lay all that out, get them tacked in place, weld it on, then it'll pretty much just slap itself together after that. With all the welding complete, we have primed and painted all the new suspension hangers, all the lateral bracing. We have already hung the front axle with the equalizer spring in that. So now all we gotta do is jack up the rear axle and start tightening our suspension bolts. Movie magic, jacking itself up. That'll work. And as we do all of our suspension bolts when we can, we put them in reverse, at least on the front and rear of the tire. That way if the bolt comes out, it's not going to dig into the tire. The equalizer bolt, it really doesn't matter. That's not going to interfere if you have a bolt loss with the tire sidewall. So with that, we're going to tighten every bolt up. We tack weld all of our nuts to our bolts just to keep them from unscrewing on our rough roads. We will leave a link in the description below that shows you how to tighten properly tighten and install the suspension. Once we get that done, literally we're just gonna put the tires back on it. And with this option, moving to a 6-lug, you do have the option of running a 15-inch 6-lug with like a 225, 75-15, or you can do a 6-lug with a 235 size tire on it and go to a little bit bigger tire. So customer on this one wants to look to see which one looks the best as far as clearance. Probably gonna do a 16 on it, but we'll get the tires on it and we'll show you what the final picture looks like. And this trailer will be ready to see you down the road. I forgot to tell you, tighten the lug nuts.